There are some very simple things that you can do to get a grasp on your glucose. When those words hit you, pre-diabetes, it's pretty scary. It hits you like a lead balloon. I remember 11, 12 years ago when I first heard those words and they came at me. It dropped me. It was like I was pretty young, so it was pretty surprising. Now, there's a lot of different factors that kind of come in with pre-diabetes, but what we can look at is how can we change our lifestyle in really simple ways, okay? Actionable things, pragmatic things, not just general things, to really start getting a grip on it. So let's go ahead and dive into what you can do to manage your glucose a little bit better. So before we get into this first one, today's video sponsor is Lakanto. Now, Lakanto is unique because they are a monk fruit, but they're unlike a lot of the other monk fruit products that are out there. So obviously, we're not talking sugar here. We're talking a sugar replacement. So if you're baking or if you're sweetening coffee or tea or anything like that, it is just the way to go. Now, the cool thing is you'll find all kinds of different monk fruits out there. A lot of them are monk fruit and erythritol together, which isn't a big deal, but the problem is when you look at a lot of brands, they'll have little granules of monk fruit and little granules of erythritol, and it ends up making it a really bad ratio. You don't know how much monk fruit you're getting, you don't know how much erythritol you're getting, whereas with Lakanto, it's interesting because they actually spray dry their erythritol with monk fruit. So it's evenly coated, so when you're baking with it or you're cooking with it, you're getting even taste and even consistency throughout, which is really important for those that are paying attention to taste. So that is a huge, huge factor there. Now, additionally, Lakanto has a wide variety of different products, not just their traditional sweeteners, right? They also have liquid sweeteners, which is just straight up monk fruit and water, more or less. So if you're trying to cut out the erythritol and you want to go that way, you can. But they also have a whole line of baked goods as well, brownies, and cookies, and everything like that, if you're trying to get a little bit of a sweet tooth solved without having a bunch of sugar. Okay, so definitely something to check out. So there's a link down below. You can use code Thomas to save 15% off. I put that link down below in the description to check out Lakanto after this video. So what are some of the things that you can do with your lifestyle? Well, one of the first things I would recommend, if you like to eat carbohydrates and you don't want to give them up, consolidate them to earlier in the day and wean them off as the day goes on. Now, this is opposite advice for someone that may not be dealing with prediabetes. For someone that is a healthy individual, I might say, have your carbohydrates at night because it might allow you to sleep better. Now, there is a practical use case for that, but in someone that is battling insulin resistance or battling glucose levels that are consistently high, you may want to have your carbohydrates earlier in the day, and it's simply because your body has more genes that are able to deal with glucose metabolism, and you express more of those genes in the morning, which means that even though your glucose might still spike in the morning, your ability to deal with excess fuel is actually better in the morning. And it has everything to do with simple daylight cues, right? When it's daytime and you have light coming at you, you have environmental cues telling your body to go ahead and metabolize and use energy. When you start stacking carbohydrates towards the end of the day, you run into a big problem. Okay, now another thing that you can do is when you are looking at a big plate of carbohydrates, you need to kind of factor in the eating order, the order in which you eat different foods on your plate. Okay, so a lot of times people say, oh, if you combine a carbohydrate with a fat, that's going to be a very good thing. It's going to slow the glucose response. Well, there's one big glaring problem with that, and that is hyperpalatability. When you take in glucose or carbohydrates along with fat, what it does to your brain as far as dopamine is concerned is pretty intense. Okay, I've done some videos on this. It's a very strong hyperpalatable response. Like carbs and fat together is almost an overload for the brain. Not all the time, but it's something you might want to be aware of. So I recommend combining protein with your carbohydrates. And having protein first can actually 2x attenuate the blood glucose response more than fat. So fat will already slow your glucose spike, but protein will 2x that. It'll double what fat can do, which means by having your protein first and then having your carbohydrates, you eliminate that huge spike and the subsequent drop, okay? So what happens a lot of times is when you are pre-diabetic or insulin resistant, you'll have carbohydrates, you'll have a big spike, and then your insulin levels will go sky high to try to deal with it, and it will bring your glucose really just down super low. And then you get hungry again, and you just repeat this surge because it's almost out of your control, okay? Now, another thing you wanna do Okay, and you're probably wondering, okay, where do the veggies come in? The veggies are a huge piece indeed, but veggies are generally speaking, okay, they're great. I'm not gonna throw them under the bus at all. Veggies are awesome. Brussels sprouts, all kinds of stuff, my jam. Asparagus, artichokes, you name it. But they are typically insoluble fiber. They positively impact glucose, indeed, but soluble fiber is going to impact glucose even better. What does that look like? That looks like things like chia seeds. That's things like flax seeds. That's things like, as much as I don't really like it, oatmeal, like a gluten-free oatmeal, it's gonna have that gelatinizing effect. That is soluble fiber where water gets absorbed with it, it swells up. So not only does this slow down digestion, not only does this slow down the uptake of the glucose, but it also feeds the microbiome. And when you feed the microbiome, this is crazy sounding, but those little suckers that are in our gut actually impact how we metabolize glucose. Not just in our gut, they literally act as a signal. So what happens is the bacteria feeds on this fiber, like chia, flax, that sits in your gut, feeds on it for a long time, and it basically, let's say, it poops out these little poop babies that are called short chain fatty acids. And these amazing little short chain fatty acids are signals. They transmit signals. Isn't that weird? Transmit signals throughout our body to do different things. And one of the key functions of a lot of these short chain fatty acids like butyrate, acetate, and even propionate is they signal the cells to be more glucose tolerant. What does glucose tolerant mean? It means that instead of your cell seeing glucose and not knowing what to do and freaking out and being intolerant, it's tolerant, it's accepting of the glucose, and the insulin response, the beta cell responsiveness is in line, and you actually can utilize glucose better. So very, very important to add that into the mix. Now, another thing that I want to focus on, this is kind of like, it's silly, but all it takes is a 5 to 7% total weight loss to reduce your risk of diabetes by 54%. There was a study that was published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine. Okay, it took a look at subjects that were overweight and subjects that were diabetic. They found that 5 to 7% weight loss led to, again, a 54% reduction in type 2 diabetes risk. So when you're looking at pre-diabetes, you are walking a thin line towards diabetes, right? And you're really scared about it. So what can you do? Without anything else coming into the equation, without freaking out about anything else, if you can commit to losing 5% of your total body weight, you could have a huge impact. I've talked about this in other videos, but if you're 200 pounds, that's only 10 pounds. And I know that that can be difficult. Okay, I know as someone that's lost a ton of weight, I know how hard it was at times, and 10 pounds may seem like a giant mountain. But if you're setting a realistic goal for yourself and you know that that potentially reduces your risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 54%, I'd say you'd be pretty motivated because you don't need to lose everything. You gotta lose 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 5 to 7%, and it can have a tremendous impact. One of the ways that I would suggest you go about doing this is maybe doing periodic lower carb protocols. Now, you might look at this and listen to this and I'm gonna turn off this video because I don't wanna do a lower carb protocol. But the reality is that you don't have to do it forever. It's about regaining insulin signaling and regaining insulin sensitivity, okay? There was a study that was published in the journal Nutrition and Diabetes, and it was a long study, a 12-month study that took a look at subjects doing a very low carb diet compared to a moderate carb, low calorie diet, okay? They were eating about the same amount of calories, but what was interesting is that the very low carb diet in comparison to the moderate carb diet ended up resulting in significantly improved HbA1c levels after 1 year. HbA1c is your glycated hemoglobin. That's basically how long glucose has been in your system and how it's been negatively affecting. It's your lagging indicator. The reason behind this is simple. It's not that it's magically fixing anything. It's that for a period of time, you are reducing the stimulus that would cause your glucose to go high. So if you give yourself a break from it, not necessarily make it a brand new lifestyle, give yourself a break, maybe you can start to regain that signal again that allows things to really work well and allows that whole system to start operating again. Another thing that you want to think about doing, and I've talked about this in other videos, but if you get this, again, flash of the words pre-diabetes from your doctor or from, your practitioner or whatever, you might want to consider when you are active. Okay, there is something that is called the insulin independent glucose uptake. What this is this is where cells take up glucose without the presence of insulin. Now, this happens in very unique, almost singular situations under muscular function, like muscular contraction. Okay, the change and fluctuation of calcium and that whole gradient that occurs, there's a bunch of different reasons why this happens, but essentially, when you move a muscle, you soak up glucose into the muscle. Okay, and this happens without insulin being present because there's other mechanisms that force what's called GLUT4 to the surface of a cellular membrane. This GLUT4 then grabs the glucose out of the bloodstream. So what does this look like? You just went to your friend's party, you had some cake, you knew you shouldn't have it's a bad time for you to do it. What can you do? Literally going for a walk or going and doing some push-ups for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, can soak up that glucose out of the bloodstream and actually draw it into the muscle, even if you're potentially insulin resistant, because this pathway does not even require insulin. Normally you eat carbohydrates, your pancreas releases insulin, the insulin then opens the cell doorway so the carbohydrates can get in, but if you're insulin resistant, that's a problem. But even if you're potentially insulin resistant, these insulin independent glucose uptake pathways can allow you to soak up that glucose. So it doesn't mean that you can never ever eat a carbohydrate again, but it does mean that when you do overdo it, you have some responsibility and you need to pay attention. Now, as I mentioned before, lifestyle changes, subbing out the sugars for something else, utilizing things that are lower glycemic, wearing a continuous glucose monitor so you can monitor these kinds of things and keep a close eye on it. I wear one, I'm not pre-diabetic anymore. My wife wears one and she's not insulin resistant, but we like to know. It's important to have data so that you can make good decisions. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. Hope these tips help you and I'll see you tomorrow.